Liberal Senator for South Australia, Alex Antic, has been a strong advocate against vaccine mandates, but recently the Senator was detained in quarantine for refusing to declare whether he was or wasn't vaccinated. Now, under Commonwealth laws, Australians don't have to declare their medical history, but in this instance, Senator Antic feels because of his outspoken views on vaccine mandates that he's become a target of the authorities. Welcome, Senator.
G'day, well, thanks for having me.
You're welcome. Now, detained in quarantine for 2 weeks? And
correct, yeah, two weeks.
For refusing to declare your vaccination status?
Well, yeah, look, I mean, I answered all the questions that were asked of me, of course. And, you know, I mean, I was perplexed by the push into a Medi hotel, or being pushed into a Medi hotel, because we've got this system in South Australia, which is not exactly something that I'm particularly keen on. This is this home quarantine app. But it was designed to avoid letting people who are otherwise perfectly healthy go into Medi hotels. I mean, it was designed for the purposes of exactly that. And so to be refused entry to my home state to start off with, and then ultimately told you can come in, but you've got to go into a Medi hotel for 14 days. I'd had a COVID test that was negative, it didn't have any symptoms. And then ultimately I had 6 COVID tests, all negative. And there was no relenting on that. And there was the discretion, as I understand it, to let me come home and use this home quarantine app. It was set up for exactly this purpose. This is the one which it checks in with you multiple times a day, takes your facial recognition data and GPS location, you know, all this sort of stuff. And still that wasn't good enough. And the thing that really tipped me off to the fact that I thought there was something more going on was the fact that when I got to the airport, there were cameras everywhere. And there were cameras everywhere because a journalist had been tipped off. So, you know, you don't have to draw a long bow to think this was special treatment, and it wasn't rolling out the red carpet, I can assure you.
Now, who do you feel is behind this special treatment?
I don't know. I mean, all I could say, though, is that it certainly wasn't me that rang a journalist and said, guess what, I'm coming to the airport, so would you like to follow me to a Medi hotel? I mean, that much I can tell you. But somebody knew about it. The journalist knew about it about 10 or 15 minutes after I had the email from the health bureaucrats. So, you know, that in itself tends to suggest that there was a statement being made, and the statement was, don't think you're, you know, you can just get away with whatever you want. We're going to make sure that someone's there to document the whole thing. So that was the beginning of it, and 14 days. But we made good use of the time, though, which was good.
Now, the frustrating thing is, Senator, this is meant to actually be a cost saving with their home quarantine thing for the taxpayer. So I would hate to see the multiplication of the cost involved in putting you in that Medi hotel versus the electronic home monitoring, as you mentioned.
Yeah, look, that's exactly right. And I think the thing that's frustrating Australians generally is the myriad of different rules. You know, I just think this is what you get when you throw the keys to bureaucrats. Frankly, I've been saying that since, in fact, I wrote an article which I was just reminded of this morning. I wrote an article for The Spectator back in December of last year, 2020, with this exact thesis, that this is dangerous. We shouldn't be throwing the keys to bureaucrats, because ultimately the bureaucracy is cut from a very different cloth. It's designed for the purposes of making regulations, making people jump through hoops, and it never operates in the rarefied air of the real world, which means that cost implications and how things are streamlined, those things never come into the equation. So we really could have seen this coming, and I've been saying for a long time that this is exactly why we need to be winding back these emergency powers across the country. This is not unique to any particular state parliament. It's a simple fact across the country, and the time has come to learn to properly live with what we're living with.
Now, really pertinent at the moment with Christmas, with people trying to reunite and spend time with their loved ones that they've been estranged for so long, but people have lost any confidence of travelling in a state for fear of being locked in, locked out, locked down in some way, shape or form. How do you think we can overcome this?
Well, I just think we've got to get on with it. I think we've just simply got to get on with living our lives. This was inevitable. And this plan that we were told by every single health bureaucrat in the country, that once we get to 80% vaccinated, that was the position of the Doherty modelling, that everything would go back to normal. Well, that just hasn't played out. So, you know, I think what we're seeing now is Omicron, which is clearly a lesser virulent strain is certainly what it seems to be. I mean, even the Deputy Prime Minister seemed to have had a dose of that in the United Kingdom, and it seems to have said it was very, very mild. That's not the test, of course, for everything, but that seems to be the evidence. I think there is no other alternative than simply getting on with this. We really don't have another alternative, and I think the first thing we need to do is start ripping the powers away from bureaucrats. I think that there needs to be some oversight from our parliamentarians who are actually elected as opposed to unelected bureaucrats, so that we can get some sense back in there. I mean, one of the frustrations for people here is this computer says no approach to the health scenario at the moment. I mean, using my case as an example, only because it's personal experience. Once you're on that train, so to speak, or into the Medi Hotel, there was really no argument. That was it, and it was completely illogical, and it was completely anti-science, and there was no oversight. There was no ability to sort of appeal to a higher body. It was just the whims of a particular group of unelected health bureaucrats. So I think we've got to get some common sense back into this. I think people are tired of the rules. Here in South Australia, we've had almost, I think, 100 public health directions, each of which having multiple different angles to it. And we've really never been shown the health advice. I mean, we're told to trust the science. They just won't show us the science. And that's the thing I think that's frustrating people.
Is this a fault in a flaw in our federation, where the control of borders has been able to be so disparate and so varying between different states and territories, that it really needs a central, as you said, we had an agreement, 80%, we got together with all the elected officials, all agreed to it, and then that just went out the window.
That's right. Yeah, and I think this is actually raised, and of course there will be a lot of fallout from the whole thing. We'll be talking about this for years because it sort of hasn't happened before. But one of the things I think we'll be talking about is the sort of the situation with respect to the entire federation. Now, I'm not somebody who's going to suggest that should be dramatically changed, but it certainly gives cause for thought, in the sense that we are now looking at the states, which we have known all along, but have never had it really properly demonstrated, who have most of the power. I mean, the states hold all of the public health power. They control police forces, they control the education system, they control most of the bureaucratic levers. And so for the Commonwealth government, funding is the main issue, and of course some of the legislative procedures that come over the top of some of these. But it really does ask the question, who holds the power in this country? And I think we're seeing increasingly that the states are very, very powerful. And we just haven't seen this before, because since Federation, there really hasn't been, a contemporary example of this. There was a Spanish flu, but a different era. And so I think it asks those questions. There are a whole heap of questions that are coming. If you'd asked me, 2 years ago, whether or not I would ever think that a Bill of Rights was a good idea, I would have laughed and shaken my head. But, you do start to wonder now. I mean, we're living in a world where employers, public health bureaucrats are telling people what to do with their medical care. And this is fundamentally wrong. It's not fair to people. We've got people going into Christmas at the moment who are going to be either looking down the barrel of losing their job, or who have already lost their job for no other crime than simply having to want to choose their own health treatment. Now, that's just not right, and we need to find a way to address that.
We seem to have had a lot of decisions being made purely on health or economic reasons, with no moral or ethical oversight. It was just, we can do this, we can mandate it, we can make it legal, but there was no moral or ethical consideration of the impact of that.
Yeah, and I guess the moral angle is the really tricky one, because there'd be people out there that would say you have a moral obligation to do this because you're protecting others, and then others would say you have a moral obligation to not force me to do something. Now, of course, we have to go back to trusting the science. There's that phrase again. And we know that the science says that being vaccinated with the current round of vaccines does not protect other people. In fact, people who are vaccinated are as infectious, if not the same, as people who are unvaccinated. So the whole notion of morality is kind of, I think, flavoured a little bit by this lack of telling the truth. And it's out there everywhere. We see it in the mainstream media. Much of the political class won't tell this story. And it just rolls on and on. It's gone into the public psyche. And so I think that's framing much of the morality in all of this. How do you get to a moral position when you're being fed lies? So look, I think there's a whole range of questions that are going to flow from this period. Obviously, we've got to get through the acute stage of it, but the truth is, I think we're just going to have to get on with this, and then get on to picking over the coals of what's happened.
All right, Senator Antic, thanks so much for your time.
Oh, thanks for having me. It's good to be home, and thanks and good luck with all the good work you guys are doing as well.
Thank you.